Welcome back. Efforts to extradite alleged state capture kingpins Atul and Rajesh Gupta are continuing. The pair was arrested last week in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates in what's been described as a major step forward in prosecuting people allegedly responsible for state capture. For more on this, we can speak to legal analyst, Advocate Modidima Mannya. Advocate, a very good evening to you. Always good to have your time. So, a headline today by one of the newspapers, the City Press, said 60 days to get the Guptas to SA. Is that too ambitious, do you think, a timeline?
Yes, good evening. It's not even possible having regard to the process that has to be followed. So it's sensational.
So, realistically, I mean, everyone talks about how this is possibly a massive breakthrough, the biggest set of arrests related to state capture allegations in this country. What do you think is a realistic timeline as far as actually getting the Gupta brothers on South African soil to appear in a court?
Well, look, I cannot tell you really what would be realistic, but I can tell you, for instance, in the United States, an extradition process takes about a year and even beyond. When I look at the law in the UAE, there's quite an elaborate process that must be followed, and an extradition order can only be executed when it's final, and that is after it has been subjected to an appeal process. So the first step, obviously, is the request, which is what is called the red notice, which led to the Gupta brothers, the two Gupta brothers, being arrested. Now, they still have a right to make representations to the public prosecutions there to be released. They can be released on the equivalent of what we call bail here. They would obviously have to surrender their passports and give assurances that they won't leave the UAE. Then the South African government must now make a formal request, which it must provide documents, the charges, the evidence, and meet a number of requirements. When that has been done and they've submitted all those documents, and if any of the requirements are not met, the extradition would automatically be rejected. So if the requirements are met, the matter will go before a panel of judges of the appeal court. And those judges will then take a decision. If the Gupta brothers, for instance, were to accept the extradition, they will be extradited. If they don't, then there will have to be a review of the extradition. So there will have to be a court process. And once that has been concluded, they still have a right to appeal. So that is only then, if once all those processes have been exhausted, that they can be brought to South Africa.
So it could be months, it could be weeks, it could be years.
It could be years, yes.
So another thing is that with an extradition treaty, even though countries have these in place, that does not automatically mean that a suspect is handed over. On what grounds could the UAE say, actually, we cannot hand these men over to you based on the following reasons?
Look, one of the things the UAE doesn't do, it doesn't extradite its nationals. So if, for instance, they were to be UAE nationals, then clearly they were not going to be extradited. They also don't extradite people who have been punished for, discriminatory practices like their cultural views or political views, or who are going to be subjected to torture. So they hold the whole list of grounds on which they can reject an extradition. But that is generally the practice globally. I mean, the United States would not extradite anybody that is going to be persecuted in his country for political reasons, for instance.
The Daily Maverick, I don't know if you've seen, has run a piece saying about the possible extradition of the Gupta brothers, and it says it had sent a list of questions to the Department of Justice as well as the NPA, which to date have not yet received a response. Among those questions is one about when South African authorities were made aware of the arrests. When did UAE officials alert them to the presence of the Gupta siblings within the borders of their country? How much does that matter in law? Is that purely political?
Well, firstly, to have an extradition, firstly you need a treaty, and I think you'll remember that the South African government battled quite a lot to get the treaty, the Mutual Assistance Agreement, signed by the UAE. It was finally signed. So, and at the time that it was signed, the Gupta brothers were there, and the South African government was aware that they are there. And once the treaty was signed, the South African government then made the request for their arrest, which is what is referred to the red notice. The UAE has now complied and arrested them. Then the next step is for the South African government to meet the requirements for extradition. So I'm not sure what the questions of the Daily Maverick are based on. Whether the South African government was made aware or not made aware, it's neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is that the extradition process is a process, a formal process on its own.
Advocate Modidima Mannya, good to have your time as always. Thank you, sir.